CAUTHE, and we've got a mixture of panel members that work both in academia and work within the industry. So all have completed their PhD but have taken different roles since completion. So hopefully it can provide you a really broad overview of different areas that you can move into once you're finished your PhD. So I've got a few quick little bios of each of the members just to give you a bit of an overview of their perspective and where they come from, and then we'll start having a few little discussions. And if you want to ask a question as we're going through, just put your hand up and we'll feel free. We'll try to make it quite sort of casual so people can sort of ask the questions, but we'll also have time at the end as well for anyone to ask any questions that they might have. So firstly, we're going to start off with Dr. Jane Godfrey. So she's worked in and consulted to the New Zealand government for the last 9 years, primarily in transport, housing and infrastructure. She's an experienced qualitative mixed methods researcher and was previously on the board of the Australian-New Zealand Evaluation Association. During COVID-19, she was closely involved in the New Zealand Government Transport Support Package first and project management for the $372 million International Air Freight Capacity Scheme, which ensured air freight continued to flow in and out of New Zealand, and later as an application and assessment workstream lead for $50 million Essential Transport Connectivity Scheme, which earned essential domestic travel routes remained open. Amazing. Since July 2022, she was been the senior advisor to, now you'll have to see if I pronounce this right, Tiwahanga? Tiwahanga, thank you, sorry. The New Zealand Infrastructure Commission, where she is part of a small team which conducts 18-month research projects to provide recommendations to the New Zealand government on various infrastructure topics. Jane has a BA, Bachelor of Art and Bachelor of Commerce, and a Bachelor of Arts in Honours in Sociology with the University of Auckland, Master of Tourism from the University of Otago, and a PhD in Tourism Management at UTS, and a graduate diploma in evaluation from the University of Melbourne. She was awarded Best PhD Scholar Paper at the 2015 CAUTHE conference. Well done, Jane.
I wasn't expecting you to read the whole thing out. I wouldn't have made it quite so long.
No, it's interesting though to hear all these different aspects that you're involved in. So we've got Dr. Aaron Tham. So he is the subject component lead in tourism, leisure and events at the University of Sunshine Coast, Australia. Under his leadership, tourism at Uni SC, so University Southern Cross?
Sunshine Coast.
Sunshine Coast. Is ranked amongst the top 150 institutions according to the Shanghai University World Rankings in Academic Subjects in 2022. He is also an active researcher with primary interest in the area of emerging technologies and event legacies. Aaron is the Senior Fellow of the Higher Education Academy and is the immediate past Vice President and Conference Chair for Travel and Tourism Research Association, Asia Pacific Chapter. At present, Aaron serves as the Council of Australian Tourism and Hospitality Education Secretary and a co-chair of the Teaching and Learning Special Interest Group. He is also in the committee for Brisbane 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Task Force to deliver legacy outcomes for South East Queensland. This year, Aaron is also one of 6 Lord Mayor Convention Trailblazer awardees to attract international business events into Brisbane. Aaron is the managing editor of the International Journal of Hospitality and Tourism Administration. So very different from Jane, so we'll get some really great different perspectives. Following, we have Dr. Henry Bowen. So Henry is the Senior Research Officer at Military and Emergency Services Health Australia, a charity which sits under the Hospital of Research Foundation Group. Their primary role was the development, implementation and evaluation of interventions and preventative programs and research studies to be sustained wellbeing of military and emergency services personnel and their families. Within their role, they also entertain that they don't entertain anything. We also
I think I'm very entertaining. I'm very entertaining.
We also ensure that the future researchers have training and support to work within the industry as a coordinator and supervisor of the placement and internship program on site. They have a history in working in early childhood mental health, human-animal interactions, and adjunct treatments with the transitional outcomes and implications. In addition, they have keen interest in developing collaborative, multidisciplinary trauma-informed research, which influence critical practice, treatment delivery, and policy and legislative decision-making. Thank you, Henry. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Richard Wright. So he's a senior lecturer in sports leadership management who specialises in events and I can't hear you, Richard. You're on mute.
Entrepreneurship.
Thank you. Rich is also an active ageing advocate ambassador, an occupational devotee, a leisure sociologist, and a lifestyle entrepreneur. Rich loves to showcase sport and recreation as a visible, valuable, and viable means of creating social change and sustainable development. He believes that sport is a universal language and has the power to inspire and unite people, offering hope and happiness to those who need it. Rich is engaged, informs, and empowers through the sharing of stories. He practices what he preaches, and sits on the board of several organisations, including the AUT Centre for Active Ageing, the Australia and New Zealand Association for Leisure Studies, and the Sporting Memories Foundation Aotearoa, New Zealand. He is also Associate Editor of the International Journal of Sociology of Leisure and the Frontiers in Sport and Active Living, and on the editorial board for the Annals of Leisure Research. Fantastic. So as you can see, we've got a really wide variety of people here that come from quite different backgrounds and of using their work that they've done through their PhD to work in lots of different areas. So just as an introduction, starting with you, Henry, because you're on the top of my screen, would you just like to give a brief overview of your career and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, I would love to. So I think I kind of started my career in research coming at it as wanting to be a career academic because I'm a glutton for punishment. So I did my undergraduate in psychology, almost immediately followed by my honours also in psychology. And then my PhD which was in slightly more of that occupational therapy space, but still very much heavily psychology because it had to do with post-traumatic stress disorder with military and emergency services. And so I knew from early on that was the sort of angle that I wanted to take from my undergraduate level. I knew I was interested in research. That was the thing that caught my interest, which kind of led me down the path of doing a PhD. But once I had finished my PhD, I think one of the big things that became apparent was that while I might love academia, academia does not always love you back. And so making sure that there was different opportunities that might have been available. And I was in a very privileged position during my PhD to have been funded by an industry partner who are now called Mesha, my current place of employment, but at the time were called The Road Home, which was a charity that funded research. And at the time I was completing my PhD, Mesha was changing from a funder of research to a conductor of research embedded within industry as an industry kind of partner that supplied research and an independent research institute that wasn't directly sitting under any one university, but was of itself its own research institute. And so I like to joke that I came with the building because I was here first and then they moved in. And so so I think basically from my career overview, I took a very mild pivot. I won't say it's a full pivot because I'm still doing research and I'm still doing the research that carrying on the research that I did as part of my PhD, but now I am doing that research embedded within an industry academic setting rather than a university academic setting, which has some very interesting differences between the two, which I might talk about throughout the course of today. But that's sort of how I came to my current role. I knew I wanted to be doing some kind of research, but what that actually looks like in practice doesn't mean I had to be at a university following a university structure. I have the ability to do very similar and at times larger or more translational or implementational research as part of industry than I may have been restricted to do within a university setting. So I guess for any HDRs who are thinking, what are my options when I finish PhDs? Maybe I would advise you, have a look at your not-for-profits who are embedded within industry, because sometimes they do run their own research, and that's always a really fun and interesting. It comes with its own challenges, but really great place to kind of experience a different kind of research. You use the same skills, but in a different way. So yeah, that's the overview of my career.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Henry. Aaron, can you give us a little bit of overview of your career?
Sure. So good morning, Kiara, and welcome to this session. My name is Aaron, and I'm on Turrbal and Jagera country in Brisbane, acknowledging the traditional owners on the land in which we meet. I grew up in Singapore, and I spent my first degree in Singapore, pretty much working in the events, marketing, tourism space. The opportunity came up to do my master's at Griffith, so I left pretty much the year after the undergraduate studies. Still worked with industry a fair bit. Had actually 2 attempts at the PhD. The first one didn't work out, unfortunately, for a whole range of reasons. Went back, worked with what would be a polytechnic sector, which then launched a polytechnic university model, now known as the Singapore Institute of Technology. And we were quite privileged when I was back in Singapore 2008, 2009, 2010, launching the 2 casino integrated resorts, ran the Formula One, which made me a bit hard of hearing. And it was an exciting time. Then went on to do the PhD 2010 to 2014 in Melbourne at Monash. PhD was in the area of social media, which was fast evolving back in those days. Facebook just started, and it opened up many doors to industry. The job came up in 2014 where I am, and I moved up to Brisbane, and we have multiple campuses in Brisbane, on the Sunshine Coast, and previously with the tourism program on the Fraser Coast as well. So it is a ongoing journey with industry, working on things like the Olympics, as you mentioned in the introduction, working with airlines. There's a lot of coffee, sometimes wine or beer involved, depending on the setting and the timing of the day. And it's always an interesting one. And I echo Henry's points. The percentage of PhD graduates going to academia is fast diminishing for a whole range of reasons as well, outside of control. So industry do open doors. I know of people who've gone to industry with places like Nestle and do fun stuff like testing consumer perceptions and colors of ice cream, for example. So you tell people it's a strawberry ice cream, but it's blue, and this kind of dissonance, and yet people still eat it because it's cool or funky. So you get to do a lot of fun stuff with industry that, as what Henry says, lies outside the remit of some of those institutions. And I think increasingly now this term called impact gets tossed around quite often. How do you demonstrate impact through society and the wider sustainable development goals, for example? So we might come back to that. So yeah, it's a bit of my story. My wife is Taiwanese, so we have hybrid children, as we call it. They're all very different growing up in Australia. And so yeah, it's an interesting journey. I think this plural identities and where we are as academic industry, I don't think there's a divide anymore. I think it's what becomes of us. So thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Richard, would you like to give us a little bit of overview of your journey?
Yeah, my journey started back in the UK. Like most kids, I wanted to be a footballer, and football was my life. And study kind of got in the way, and so I didn't really take it seriously until I discovered I wasn't going to be a footballer at about 15, 16 when I didn't get into a contract. So I talked my way into university. I taught my way into a sixth form, and the only qualification I could do was this GMVQ and leisure and tourism, because I didn't have the grades to A level. So basically the only thing I could get in to do was this thing called leisure and tourism. And I did it because A, I like leisure, and B, I like going on holiday. So that seemed like the perfect course for me. And doing that, I discovered again, I actually quite liked studying. And so that 2 years went through way too fast. And then it was like, okay, what do I do next? And again, I managed to talk myself into university.
I can't imagine that at all, Richard.
To do tourism management. It was basically a toss of a coin to do. I wanted to do sport management, but you had to have better grades for sport in those days. So it was literally a toss of coin with doing leisure management or tourism management, and tourism came up because I liked the tourism school at Eastbourne more than the leisure school. So I literally fell upon it by accident. But met a guy again through this is all connections. There was a conference being hosted at the University of Brighton. A guy called Brent Ritchie was over from Otago and doing a sabbatical. Made friends with him over a pool table, and he convinced me to come to Dunedin when I finished, basically to do a master's at Otago and just travel. I couldn't afford to do that, so I had to go and work for a few years. And I was fortunate that when I was doing my undergrad, I was funded my final year on a deal from the Cambridge City Council that I'd go and work for them. So I kind of contractually went and worked for them for a couple of years, but always kept the kind of idea in mind that I might come to New Zealand. Loved it, loved Otago, loved my time down there. Again, stumbled across research. It was more when I was doing my master's, I needed to earn some money, so I agreed to do some tutoring. And that's the bit where I really just fell in love. I loved talking, as the guys who know me know, and I loved just being in front of the class and just talking and sharing my knowledge from what I'd taken from the UK. And I found through tutoring, I had to read more stuff than I'd ever read when I was studying. And I think it's through tutoring and then like really enjoying that kind of the masters flew by, and then it was a case of what am I going to do next. And I was very fortunate to get a scholarship to do a PhD at Otago with the International Scholarship, which I still think they only gave to me because I was very valuable in the classroom, and with me doing all their teaching meant they didn't have to. So I think that's why they gave me the scholarship. But yeah, so the PhD didn't go to plan. And again, I can talk about that a little bit later on, but I ended up writing an autoethnography about the research that didn't go to plan. And then I ended up moving back to the UK. Again, it was all around sport events. So similar to Aaron, legacy, using events. And again, fortunate that when I was doing my PhD, it was all around the Rugby World Cup 2011 planning. And my master's looked at the Lions Tour before that, the 2005 Lions Tour, and how that could be used to help justify the bid for Rugby 2011. And through doing all of that, again, I went to a couple of conferences thanks to my scholarship in the UK, and got offered a chance to go back to Leeds, to go to the UK and basically set up a sports event management program at Leeds Beckett, Leeds Met Uni. And what attracted me again was the teaching. I found myself at universities where teaching is actually valued as much, if not more so, than research. So, I do research on the side but I really enjoy being in front of the classroom still, being in front and inspiring the next generation. And I've got that at Leeds Met. And then when my wife decided we needed to come back to New Zealand, AUT, again, is a very, very similar university in that it really does value. It gets you in front of the classroom. It also gives you the freedom, because they're just grateful if you do any research. There's not the pressure to get published in high ranks. It's just if you're doing research, they're grateful. It's more important that it's industry based. So they give me that opportunity to be in the industry and volunteer at events and work with events and do consultancy. And I think that's the key thing. I've supervised PhD students that are clearly going to go into postdoc and clearly never leave a university, whereas I've got others who are like yeah, the university is just a vehicle to allow us to get into industry and have impact and do things, change the world. And yeah, through that, again, I stumbled into many different areas, such as this active aging stuff that I'm really passionate about now.
Thank you, Richard. And Jane, how did you get to where you are now?
So I think, Aaron, I'm pretty sure we met. I've just realised that we did our PhDs at the same time, and I'm pretty sure we met. It was the CAUTHE PhD workshop years ago, yeah. And Richard, we've also met, but we'll come back to that. So similar to Henry in that I think I was always interested in research, but also similar to Richard in that it was not sort of here's the starting point and there's the end goal. It's been a bit more meandering. So I finished my undergrad degree, and then I actually went to Germany and taught English for 18 months. Came back just as the GFC was hitting, couldn't get a job anywhere, and was turning 24, which meant I qualified for the student allowance. So I figured I'd go back to uni, enroll in an honours. At least I'd have some sort of money while I figured out what I was going to do. My honours somehow turned into doing my master's, and then I really enjoyed my master's. I applied for one university for one PhD scholarship to one supervisor, and if I got the scholarship, I was going to go to UTS and do my PhD. If I didn't get the scholarship, I was going to go to my mate's wedding in London and look for a job in London and move to the UK for a bit. Got the scholarship, went and did my PhD in Sydney. That, yeah, was sort of a bit complicated. I ended up doing my data collection in Peru for 6 months, and then Sydney's really expensive to live in, even with a scholarship. And UTS agreed that I could live in Auckland. My grandma was really sick at the time as well, so I was quite keen to be back in Auckland around family. So then moved back to Auckland, was doing my PhD there, got 3 years into it, still had a year to go, scholarship was running out. It's like, better find a job. So I applied for basically any research jobs that were going across Auckland and Wellington. I never wanted to be an academic. If you ask my PhD supervisor, he'll tell you that I did the bare minimum of theory to get through a PhD, but it was definitely, the theory was not the bit I was interested in. I was a lot more interested in the applied research and what did it actually mean in the real world. That was really hard. I didn't have any actual work experience at that point. So I got knocked back a lot. Finally got offered one interview in Wellington for a junior research job at a research and evaluation consulting company. So I took that, moved to Wellington. They mostly did work for the Ministry of Social Development. So that was learning, which was not something I knew anything about, but it was one of the few sort of qualitative research jobs. Worked there for a couple of years, realised that if you wanted to progress within Wellington research space, most of the contracts were coming from the public sector, so you really needed some sort of public sector experience and understand how the machinery of government and things works. So I took a 3-month fixed-term role at the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. I always forget what the I stands for. Took a 3-month role there. That got extended to 6 months, got extended to 9 months, but it was all sort of very unclear what was happening. Then got a permit. So again, sort of desperate for any job, applying for any research job across Wellington, and got a permanent role at the Ministry of Transport, and that was how I sort of ended up more in the transport infrastructure space. Was there for 3 years, sort of wasn't, I don't know, there's a lot, I mean, COVID was a crazy time for everyone. There was a lot of movement happening there. Wasn't feeling sort of challenged enough, so I went back into consulting, so back to the private sector for a year, and then my current role came up, so I've been here bang on a year now at the Infrastructure Commission.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jane. So a lot of you have sort of said a lot about your career path and how you got there and all that kind of stuff. What sort of role did networks and people you met and conferences and all that, what role did that sort of play, and how important is that in sort of moving forward and developing what you might want to do? Aaron, do you want to start for us?
Yeah, I think the word network has very broad connotations to both academia and industry. Sometimes the academic conferences is almost like a pilgrimage. Each year, these people come together and meet together at this one place. The industry conferences are a bit more diverse, and they happen year round, and you get to meet different people. I remember some of the, I guess, more unorthodox ones were things like a luncheon where you meet people invited by Brisbane City Council or business events. And I happened to be sitting next to the general manager in Australia for Air New Zealand. And this was the day after we had the massive floods in Brisbane. So a lot of cancellations. The restaurant that we rocked into at 11 o'clock in the morning, we were still clearing about 50 centimeters of flood water out so that the dinner or the lunch could happen that very day. So we sat down, we had a chat over lunch, and he was talking about some of the work that he was doing, and I was thinking, why don't we work on something together? So we actually went and wrote a paper together with industry. Then other situations came up. I met some of the developments here in Brisbane. They're developing a casino integrated resort. Again, we worked on the paper, which turned into a policy document that they use for their own work. So I think those kinds of networks are quite unorthodox. They happen obviously around other commitments. That's what Richard might imagine, teaching commitments. And university is a funny beast. It's 2 semesters of 13 weeks, and everything works around it. So in summer, like everything shuts down, but industry doesn't think like that. In industry, it's 365 days. And COVID, that's what Jane said, is it's changed a lot. How we work together now, so much has changed. Many of them are not around anymore. I think my heart really goes out to a lot of indigenous businesses. We've lost, I think, 65% here in Australia, and the challenge is we don't know where these workforce are. So when we think industry, I think hopefully we also start a conversation what the future of industry workforce will look like, because it's quite unclear at the moment.
Thanks, Aaron. Jane?
Sorry, I've forgotten what the actual question was. Was around how networking's guided career path, is that right?
Yes.
So I did go to a lot of CAUTHE conferences, and I think I was co-convener of one of the special interest groups at one point. So I think when I was doing my PhD, I was quite heavily involved in it. But then it's 9 years that I've been in Wellington now. I've been very much outside of academia. So I've been going to a lot of, there are public sector conferences, but they're definitely not as, there's not as many of them. But I think, like, just reflecting on my current job, I saw the ad on, I think it was either Seek or Trade Me or something, saw the ad, knew someone who I'd worked with 2 years ago who worked there now, flicked him an email, had a phone call with him. He took me through, turns out it was like the sort of sister team to what he was in. He took me through all of how the organization worked, why they were setting up a new team, what the manager was like, what the senior management was like. And that turned out really well so I got an interview, but in the interview they were really impressed because I knew how the business worked. I knew who everyone was. I knew how it all worked because I'd had that sort of background information beforehand. I don't know, it's been interesting because you sent through the questions earlier, Katie, and it's been quite good reflecting this week, and that I can look backwards and see how one job led to the other, but it definitely, at the time, going forwards towards it, it's definitely not a clear path.
Yeah, and I suppose it's a good message as well, isn't it? It's like it's not always going to be like this straight line. There's going to be different swerves, good and bad. They're going to come and you learn from them. And
I think a lot of it's just taking up opportunities when they're presented. So a lot of the COVID stuff that you were saying in my intro, that was not at all my core job. So I was hired as a researcher and an evaluator. This was much more program management and procurement and commercial procurement. But someone needed to do it. It was a really good learning opportunity. It's opened up other doors for other careers if I want to move into that space. I think just taking advantage of opportunities as and when they arise.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Jane. Richard.
Yeah, as I said, to me, the best thing about academia is the conferences, and the most fun I've had in research has been at conferences. And I'm not going to lie, I pick my conference destinations based on, have I been there before? No, I haven't. Oh, I've always wanted to go there. That's when I'll go. It's interesting what Aaron said. I totally agree that some people, it's just the pilgrimage. You just go to the same conferences every time. And again, I'm not like that. So, I try to go diverse. I get myself into industry ones. I go to leisure studies, tourism, events, sport. So I try to make sure I don't go to the same conference 2 years in a row, because I don't want to see this. I do know you see the same people, and it's like, and I remember, again, the job that I've got right now, I took it from a guy called Nico Schulenkopf, who, if you're at UTS, you might know Nico. And story behind that is I applied when I was just about to finish the PhD at Otago, and I didn't really want to leave New Zealand because I love this country. I wanted to go up to AUT, and I'd heard great things about AUT, and I wanted to get into the School of Sport and Recreation and carry on the stuff I was doing around event management in a school of sport. And there was a job going, and I didn't get an interview for it. And I was like, oh. And basically the little one-liner came back saying, thank you, you've not got a PhD at the moment, it's not conferred, so sorry, we're not going to pursue this. And fair enough, I was coming from a tourism department, so I was trying to talk myself in. And they said no. And I had another opportunity to go to La Trobe and in Melbourne, which again, sport mecca, capital. I've done a lot of my PhD research in Melbourne, so I was very keen on that one. And the guy came back again, a friend who I'd met at a conference, said, you're in the top 3, but you're there. There's 2 candidates that are stronger than you, and basically they just needed to pick a third, and you're the third person. And I was like, and I said, oh, that's interesting because I've had this offer from the UK that was third in my choice. Not really keen to go back to the UK, but and he was like, take it. Trust me, take it. Jobs will come up again for us. This is too good an opportunity. So again, the network around me was, you should take this job. Now, fast forward a year and a half into that job, we hosted 2 conferences, including the Leisure Studies Association conference and an event conference. And I was involved on the committee of both of those. And I saw that this guy from AUT was coming to this conference and was actually signed up to go to both of them. And I thought, okay, well, AUT is a place that's still on my list. This Nico guy is coming along. Don't know who he is, but I'll reach out to him and I'll say, hey, I see you're actually coming to both conferences. What are you doing the weekend, between the 2 conferences? Do you want a place to stay? I can show you around. I've spent a lot of time in Auckland. My wife's from Auckland. So Nico came. We hosted him. He was in the spare room. And then I discovered that he'd got the job that I'd gone for. And he was like, so I was like, how long have you been at AUT? Oh, actually only about a year and a half. Oh, what job did you get? What do you teach? Sport event management. Oh. And then he admitted over a couple of drinks that he didn't really want the job. He was waiting for a UTS job to come up. He just needed a job. So he was basically just treading water there until the job at UTS comes up, which had been promised by Stephen and some of the UTS guys. It said, like, as soon as the job, it's yours, Nico. So I've said, well, you let me know when that job comes up and give me heads up because I want your job. And sure enough, about 6 to 8 months later, just as I was starting this amazing project in England around sport tourism with Mike Weed and the guys down at Bournemouth University with European funding, it was going to be amazing. Nico calls me and says, guess what? Are you still interested? Because I'm about to jump ship to UTS. So again, that whole, I don't know. My wife was, yes, take it. He introduced me to the whole team. So when I did the interview for AUT, I was pretty much a staff member already because I knew everybody in the team that I was about to join, thanks to Nico. And we still, I catch up with Nico. We're still good friends. But, so again, it's the connections you make at the conference. I go and present research because that's the only way you get funded to do it. And I usually will present 3 times at a conference to make it worthwhile. I'll never just go and submit 1 abstract. I'll always try and present the maximum number of times you can. And then it's the engagement, it's the networking, it's the going to the student stuff, which I still always will make time and go to a student thing and helping people through. And it's where you learn. Like, I find it's the best time to learn. And plug for the leisure studies conferences, they're always the best ones.
Thanks, Richard. And Henry?
I am just going to start by saying I know I'm on the ANZALS board and it is my job to say that the ANZALS conferences are the best. However, I genuinely believe they are some of the best conferences that I go to, not just because the content is really amazing and all of the people are amazing, but the quality of the types of conversations that you have and then what that leads to. My most tangible, I guess, kind of next steps have come out of relationships that have been formed at ANZALS events or strengthened at ANZALS events. through being able to have the space at an academic conference to actually have those conversations. So often I go to academic conferences and you're so busy, you're kind of running from presentation to presentation. You get 15 minutes, 20 minutes to talk to people sometimes, that you need to like section off time to have longer conversations. Whereas I feel like at ANZALS you actually get that time, and so that's my little spruik of the ANZALS conference. Come and chat. But I think my view of networking in connection is very interesting, because I think it's a combination of sort of what Aaron and Jane do and what Richard has done around a combination of intentional networking and unintentional networking. Because I think that there's a certain strength, or a certain, when you're doing your PhD, you're so focused on doing the work, and it's always good to think about, what is my next step? What is going to come next? You might not know, but you're looking for those opportunities, and you might be intentionally seeking out people who will have those opportunities, but also being really open to those sort of incidental, like, hey, and not necessarily drinking, because not everyone, that's their cup of tea, but it's like, hey, we're going down to the pub with some people who have come from such and such, and it might be industry, it might be policy, but kind of getting a feel for those sorts of relationships. And I do think that even on the other end, I'm in the process of hiring some new staff, and through that process, I think 5 of the applicants, there has been a connecting point between that applicant and me that we may not have been aware of when we were applying. It's like through conversations we've gone, oh, I saw you did this here with this person, do you know such and such? And it was those connecting points which actually sometimes strengthened an applicant, like in terms of us as a research centre going, you know what, if I go and ring that person and they say they're good cheese, I know that that's going to be a good person to come on board. I trust them. There is the relationships that you're building are not just kind of transactional. It's also, you're building like these networks of people that you know you can trust to come to for, hey, can you tell me if that role is going to become available? Because I trust you to be able to tell me when that role comes available, or those sorts of things. So I think, yeah, that's, for me, networking's been really, really important. I first met my now boss way back in the first 6 months of my PhD, because someone else on my panel said, hey, this ethics application, I know a person who knows a person who has done a lot of ethics applications with the Department of Defence. We should see if they're free to read it and give you their opinion. And that's how we met. I cold emailed her saying, hi, I'm a PhD candidate. I've never done an ethics application to this group before. Can you help me? And she then took 10 minutes out of her day to read over my application, leave some comments, et cetera, et cetera. That's how we first met. So I do think there's a lot of strength in that intentional networking, but also that incidental, come grab a cuppa sort of networking as well.
Thank you very much, Henry. So for working within academia, there's often a lot of pressure on getting funding to assist with programs that you're doing or research projects that you're getting into. Have you guys got any advice on how to sort of try to attract the funding, or how to talk to different agencies, or both internal or external from academia? Jane, do you want to start? If you much experience.
I'm probably on the flip side, in that we're the ones who have got the money, who people are coming and asking us for it.
Yes.
Probably 2 things. And I say this because we've been engaging with a lot of academics in the last couple of weeks, and it's been quite interesting the way they talk about things and the way we think about things within the public sector. I think 2 things is, I don't know how it works in Australia, but the public sector funding year in New Zealand is July to June. So no one's got any money at the end of June. If you can get that sort of sweet spot in kind of April, May, when they've got some money left in this year and they're willing to dish it out, or when they're writing business cases for next year and you can get it in the budget, then that's probably a good time to approach people. I think public sector doesn't care about publications. I don't care if you get a publication out of the work. Like, most of the time, as long as you write the report that we want, you can publish it in whatever else you want and get your own publications. But I think it's a very that took me a long time to learn. It's very much, it's a different way of writing, it's a different type of report, and if you can give us that answering the questions that we've got, then that's a lot more useful than the sort of theory-based stuff that you might get out of the same data set. And I had another thought and it's gone now, so I can't remember what it was. It'll come back to me.
Yeah. Henry, you're also out, you're probably on the same side as Jane. What's your...
I'm kind of in an interesting in-betweener because we do academic research here, but we are based in industry. So we both give and accept funding. And one of the big things, I guess, for me is I work in a very targeted industry. I work with military and emergency services and their families. So from my perspective, one of the biggest things to learn from working with industry is know their language and know their wants and needs. And the best example I can think of that is we work a lot in well-being and mental health. Often, if you're looking at, for example, emergency services, if you're coming to them saying we want to work in well-being and mental health, they're less interested in that, even though they know they should be, but they're getting hammed from all corners about that. That's not going to affect their operational effectiveness, which is the thing that is at their bottom line. So you kind of have to understand what is the language that's going to make them perk their ears up. So what we've learned is when we talk about well-being, the way we talk about it with certain industry stakeholders is we talk about it as optimizing performance. And it really means the same thing. Take care of the members using these strategies and they're going to stay longer or work harder or be fitter to perform the job. But we're using the language that they need is part of their industry to understand what we're trying to communicate, even if the end result is exactly the same. So I think if you are working in a targeted industry, whatever that target might be, put some concentrated effort into learning some of the language that's needed in those industries and knowing what are the ways that they are going to want you to express that point. Even if the actual meaning of the point is exactly the same, learning to reroute that to suit that industry is always going to help those conversations carry on.
Thanks, Henry. Aaron,
I'll start with a disclaimer. I know I struggle with this. I'm totally unqualified to talk about funding. We apply for funding left, right, and center throughout the year, and Jane knows the academic financial year as well, July to June. We apply for 12, maybe 16 industry grants a year. Sometimes we win one, sometimes we win none. And the challenge now, I think, as you mentioned, is the pressure of the funding cycles to support some research or even in a case some careers if you are a research only position at institution is quite scary. It's elevating mental health issues, job security, tenure work, and people are trying to do research, but sometimes you're a bit hamstrung by what access you get and where they're coming from. I, however, have addressed this with support externally. So there's a lot of grants from other countries, and I say, look, we'll work on this together. Yes, it may not count in my institution because the money sits elsewhere, but however, we've been able to do this. One of the interesting ones that I managed to get industry to support it in kind was I was doing research when Uber started its operations in Queensland, and this was going back 2016. So I said, well, where am I going to get the data and the funding from? So ABC rang up and said, would you do a breakfast meeting on Uber? I said, okay, in exchange, here's the survey link. Can you help me find the respondents? I've got the ethics clearance. They said, yeah, that's not hard. So I did the morning interview at 4:45 in the morning. And within a day, I had all my survey respondents I needed. It got turned into, obviously, for research outputs, a journal article, but it went all the way to the Queensland government as a policy document on how to do ride sharing. It's still an interesting project. Not all industry reports end with a happy ending, we had flour and eggs thrown at us from people who were quite adamant that they did not want something like that in the landscape. So yeah, there's some perks. You always don't know what you're gonna get when you go into this. I mean, sometimes you get chocolate, sometimes you get like fudge or cream or whatever. But it really depends on who you're working with. And I must say, working internationally has opened up many more opportunities as well. I'm quite privileged and blessed to have people in Asia Pacific where I write with and work on projects across probably more than 12 countries, just so that the research keeps going to do things that we enjoy. But yeah, I mean, talking about grant money, I think it's quite different now, and there are new windows. There is some institutional interest into areas like cryptocurrency and digital finance, but for others, it's still a long way off because of the risk and the volatility of prices like Bitcoin and other things, and legality in different landscapes as well. So while we think of grant money as dollars and cents, I think now we're starting to think in terms of barter trading and other forms of financing, green financing, that could perhaps be a wider conversation outside of what we've got time for here today.
Thanks, Aaron. And Richard.
Yeah, I should probably start out again with all the funding applications that have got nowhere. And, again, and my sort of mindset is, when we found an area, so we do action research, when we found an area that there's a problem and we want to try and understand that problem and see if we can fix that problem, then I'm very fortunate that, I surround myself with people that we're just going to do it anyway. And we work out, one of the problems is how do we do it without the funding? And then, so a lot of the ways we sort of do is we've managed to do quite a lot of what we think is impactful research that there's no journal articles to show we did it. If it did, I'd be a professor. But, the impact that's gone out into the community is there to be seen. And I'll always say to people, if you can give us, if I can get $15,000, then I can get a PhD student and I can get the university to match that. And then you get me for free because you've got a PhD student for 3 years, me for free, plus another supervisor. And that PhD student is going to dedicate their life over the next few years to this project. Now, Jane will know if we go to industry and say that they want 12 months, no, we're not going to wait 3 years, 4 years for your answer. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to do research with you. I'm only going to engage in projects that we're going to do properly and actually have a significant impact from. You can go to a consultancy and get the wham bam, what you want to read in a month or a year's time. So hence my applications don't always go to plan. But through having those conversations, the prime example at the moment is with the Centre for Active Aging, we got this opportunity to do this Sporting Memories Foundation, and we actually got the university again. If you can convince your own employees that it's worth funding, most of my funding has come internally. So it's faculty contestable funding because I can show my colleagues that this is, of value. So we've actually, that kickstarted the whole Centre for Active Aging and now the Sporting Memories Foundation, where I now sit as the chair of that. So now I can go for funding for the charity, but make sure every piece of funding we go for, it's clear that there will be research component in this. So then I can take that back to the university or any university, and I've worked with other universities, it doesn't have to be my own, and go, this is the project that we want to do together. So again, it's circumnavigating, it's finding solutions to problems. So I get to do what I want. Research that's going to make me happy, research that's going to be valuable. And again, if I can bring PhD students along with me, that's to me the most enjoyable bit because I learn from them doing a lot of the work. So
yeah, thanks, Richard. So really quickly, we're running a little bit into question time, but just like short, sweet answer. What's your piece of advice to a PhD student? We'll kick off with you, Richard.
If you're not on LinkedIn, get on LinkedIn and connect to as many people that are in your circle or in the industries you want. You don't have to like them. You don't have to know them on Facebook. Just reach out to them. Yeah, and some will snub you because they don't know, but the good ones will connect with you because they're interested in what you're doing and they want to help see you succeed. So LinkedIn is my...
Thank you, Richard. Henry?
I hard agree with the LinkedIn point, because that's been an amazing collaborative tool for me. If you have the capacity, and not everyone does, get involved in mentoring. I know that can feel a bit strange as a PhD student. There can be a bit of imposter syndrome around the idea of, I don't know that I should be mentoring other people, but get involved in that if you can, in both directions, as a mentor and as a mentee, because that's going to help expand not only the network of people who are already in the place where you want to be, but are the people who are going to come up sort of behind you to potentially be your colleagues one day, who can be those people who go, you helped me right early in my master's. I'm now qualified and working over here. I've got a project that I know is right up your alley. Can I have a chat to you? That sort of thing. It's less of a line and more of a circle, or a sphere. So be engaged in that. And it's also going to enhance your learning amazingly. So yeah, highly recommend that if that's something you can do.
Thanks, Henry. Aaron?
I think it might be worthwhile to read or watch Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And my point being is, you've got to think about global mobility these days. Very few of our careers will be where you finish your studies or your work and you're in the same city throughout. I think the nature of some of the things that we do may take us places, but like what Henry says, it may not be for everyone, for a whole range of commitments, but that's the reality in today's world.
Thank you, Aaron. And Jane?
So I've got two really quickly. I think one, if you are looking for a job outside of academia, if you can, try and get some experience writing for a non-academic audience. So whether that's, I don't know, like a blog post or the conversation, or getting involved with one of the sort of less academic focused research groups. But also agree with Richard's comment about LinkedIn. I think the other thing that I just want to note is, as much as you're networking for yourself, you can also help each other out. So it might be that you're talking to someone, you're like, oh, actually, someone I met at this PhD session is also working on this, and sort of helping others make connections, because that'll also come back to you. And the more that you've talked about your work, other people will help you out the same way.
And that connection happened earlier on today when I was having a conversation with Kevin. We work in local government, and so we made a good connection there and can probably assist each other. So even attending things like this can really assist. Now I've got a message here, a question here from Sophie, or a comment. She said that some universities run workshops for students about how to do their LinkedIn profiles, and that could be really beneficial to set it up correctly and make sure that you're getting the information out there so that people understand what you do. And Henry, you can say what you've said in Australia.
So the conversation is a place where you can kind of publish non-academic work that covers an academic topic, and just another place that's recently come to my attention is Croaky News. I think they're mostly health adjacent, but that's another avenue for that practice of non-academic writing, but still potentially communicating academic work
as well. So I just want to open it up to the floor now. Has anyone got any questions for anybody, or the whole group? Please feel free to come off mute and ask your question. No questions?
Well, I've got a comment if no one's got a question. Sorry, Anita, I'll be super quick. I was just going to say Henry's comment earlier around cold approaching people. I think, Richard, you won't remember this, but we had coffee about 12 years ago because Nico Schulenkoff was my supervisor at UTS, and I did my master's at Otago with Tara Duncan, and I was back living in Auckland, and they all told me, message Richard, like meet up with him. He can help you with ethnography work. So it worked out. You were very helpful. Thank you.
My question was going to be, where have we met?
Yeah.
I've gone through the LinkedIn thing, and I was like, I know you, and I could not work out where or how our paths had crossed. So Thank you for that. Was going to be my question to you.
Well done, Anita.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for your very interesting and very authentic comments. I think sometimes we just need to be told how it is. I'm a bit of I guess, a different student than the normal students, because I was in the industry for a long time before I decided to move into academia. So I totally understand what, for example, Jan and Henry were saying about having to speak the language. So I wanted to know if by any chance you have some suggestions on how we learn this language, like how we actually getting to, I mean, of course, for me it's a bit different because I was in industry, so I kind of have the same jargon. But for a student, for example, a PhD student that is coming straight from the studies, never had that engagement before, how do they actually build up this vocabulary or this way of talking to industry so that they are being heard?
Go for it, Rich.
I would say make sure your methodology is action research and that the PhD research you're doing is for industry. And again, plug to the conference here, the thing that infuriates me is to think that university is not a part of the industry. And, there is this real world university, academia, industry. And again, big theme of our conference is bridging the divide, hence the picture of the bridge, because we're as much a part of the industry. And where we've got to understand is why industry don't see we are, when most of the industry have come through a university to get to where they are. So, it's really about, understanding what they want to hear and why so the more time you can spend with industry, and if to do your research for industry, within industry, alongside industry, however you want to call it, before you know it, it's actually the challenge I have is trying to turn it into academic speak for those journals, which is again why I do autoethnography, because it allows me just to speak how I want to speak and present it. So surround yourself with them. Don't think that you're not a part of industry still, because you are.
I'll jump in as well to add to what Richard has mentioned. Often it's also repackaging, and it might be even how you present your CV. An industry CV and an academic CV is quite different, and you've got different things that you want to flesh out. But also, we've started with our HDR students things like writing for the conversation, doing a podcast. What does a white paper look like? Some of them have done their own TikTok, which is interesting because I don't know how much of the industry understands it because it's so short. But what that does, it opens up different measurements. So rather than the usual research outputs, we've now gone down this path, and I think the university has put together this NTRO, non-traditional research outputs that we measure. So things like your earned media value, so how many people visit your site, how many people actually share that. So there's a lot of different tools and analytics that you can use now to kind of speak industry in that sense. And I think institutions are now having to recognize that more. So this large indicator of societal impact is measuring these things. And very few, I would say, journal articles get more than 100 people reading it or citing it. But if you've done something as what we've heard from things like not for profit, you've done some work with your local councils and so on, and you've got that reach or evidence to it, I think that's actually going to help. What I hope for is for institutions to do more training on how to get non-academic careers. I don't think enough institutions do that kind of training, because they've only got them for 3 years or 4 years and then they're out. So I think that's going to be very, very important in today's context.
I kind of have two comments on this one. The first one is sort of along the lines of what Aaron and Richard have been saying. Speak to the industry themselves that you're wanting to work with. If you can try and get a single connection who can help, like you can also sometimes just explicitly ask, oh, I'm speaking to such and such, this is what I want to talk about, what do you think, how would you phrase it? And that can be a good way to help you understand like the actual ins and outs of that language. And for me, a big part of that is not just the industry providers, but the end user. Understand what the end user is going to want, because sometimes it can be different. The language that you use might be different if I'm talking to an organization versus if I'm talking to the person that organization serves. So kind of also understanding that spectrum, because the industry will know what their end user language is. And sometimes you might not use the industry's language, but you use the end user's language, and they'll know the connection is there. So that's my first kind of comment. My second comment, where you can maybe learn some of this also, is if you have the opportunity, speak to your university media team, because it is their job to know how to translate your research outputs for the lay person. And if there is a specific industry slant, to be aware of, oh, you can't use that word because in this industry that word means something different. And so sometimes that can be helpful to have a conversation with your university media team, to be like, this is the work that I'm doing, this is the industry I want it to be reaching. Could you assist me in this remodeling or something like along those lines? And that through those processes you will pick up on what are the common language changes that are happening, what are the common kind of word transfers. So that's mine's a little bit more, I guess, like practical, like I have something right now I want to take to industry. That's the way that I think would be a good strategy to do those things.
Thank you very much. Well, we've just about run out of time, so I want to take this opportunity to thank the panel very much for their contribution and their thoughts. Now we're doing a speed dating section next. You're most welcome to stay and be involved and make some connections with the students if you're available. If not, completely understand. And we just want to thank you very much for your contribution. But thank you very much. And if anyone wants to get in contact with anyone, let me know, and I can pass emails on to people if you're all happy with that.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me and inviting me to contribute. And I'm very sorry I won't be able to stay for the speed dating, but if anyone would like to connect, please, Katie, get my details from Katie, or do as Richard said and connect with us on LinkedIn, and send me a message. I would be more than happy to get back to you. And yeah, thank you for having me, and yeah, appreciate being here.
Thank you very much.
And come to the conference.
Shameless plugs.